Alan Freeman is next. He's co-director with me of the Geopolitical Economy Research Group here at the University of Manitoba. He was an economist with the Greater London Authority between 2000 and 2011, where he held the brief for creative industries and the living wage. He's also the author of The Ben Heresy, a biography of the British politician Tony Benn, and has co-edited 3 books on value theory. He's honorary life vice president of the UK-based Association for Heterodox Economists and vice chair of the World Association for Political Economy. Alan, I see you are already starting, so please go ahead. We can't hear you, Alan, if you are speaking.
I can't work out how to make
Okay, we can hear you now.
I can't work out how to make this graph move on. I can only display it, but I'll do what I can. I want to follow on from what many of the speakers have said. I won't mention names because pretty well everybody has said something that allows me not to say it. I am of the view that Sarah just stated, which is we are on the verge of a tremendous knockdown crisis in the north. And this is going to have very large implications. And I want to put this in the context of the following question, a very simple question. Why is the left in the north so small? And will that change? And I want to raise a question which has occurred to me in the course of writing about this, which is what has happened, which I think we should address. I think the manifesto group should address this question. What has happened to the original project of Marx and Engels to create an international of working people? What has happened to the slogan, workers of the world unite, you have nothing to lose but their chains? Well, imperialism happened to it. That's the simple explanation. But I think more than that happened. If you look at the history of the attempts, there was the first international, which founded essentially on the split between the Bakuninists and Marx. There was the second international, which was the mass international, coming after the Great Recession of 1870, that gave birth to sort of modern socialism and modern communism as a world movement. And we should not forget that without the Second International, I'm not sure the Bolsheviks would have existed, because the Bolsheviks were a faction within the social democracy. So that what happened is communism emerged out of social democracy. I mean, I come not to praise social democracy, but to bury it. But you have to recognize one's origins. So there was a historic split in the world movement at that time. And the way that communists since then have oriented themselves is to suppose that the 1924 conference of the Comintern, which is probably the highest point of understanding of the relation between imperialism and socialism, was creating a basis to correct that. So what emerged then was the Third International, the 27 points and so on, the Communist International. There was then, divisions, as we know, within the Third International, the project of creating the Fourth International, which, as far as I can make out, although I was a member of it for many years, has simply become an instrument of imperialism. What I think we haven't looked at is the fact that the Third International was dissolved. So there has been, for 70 years, no mass organization of working people worldwide. It has not existed. The incubator, therefore, for working class struggles remains confined to the national sphere. We don't operate on the international sphere. Now, when you have countries such as socialist China that are actually promoting messages that have a resonance amongst working people the world over, of course, that in a certain sense acts as a surrogate. But I don't think there is a substitute for creating a mass international organization of workers. And our task in that is phenomenally important, because we have to create we have to attempt to create mass organizations of propertyless people in the global north that recognize what is set out in the manifesto. That's an immense task. And of course, we can't do it on our own. And I think the points that were made by Jenny about avoiding sectarianism is extremely important. We're not a new party. We're not a Fifth International. We're a forum for discussion. We're a forum for encounter about from different currents the world over, in which I think that, you know, the priority that we have is that we want the global North to learn from the global South. So is that possible? I think it is. This first graph I've put here, I mean, I've shown this before, but I think it's phenomenally important, is what is driving this whole damn thing is that imperial capitalism has been declining since 1960. Now, the name given to this, I think, has been referred to as, you know, the long decline. But I think people don't realize how long it is. And it is now at rock bottom. Now, what does that mean? It means, because the United States is driving this whole thing, but all countries are in decline. This is an average of the whole of the North, is that the only way that the United States of America can maintain its world dominance is by driving everybody else down. That's the source of the military attacks that Keith mentioned. That's the source of, that's why, as John said, you know, they're going to this immensely risky provocation of actually going for an all-out war with a major nuclear power, probably the major nuclear power in the world apart from the US, maybe the major nuclear power full stop, which is an unbelievably risky undertaking. Why are they doing it? Because they have no choice. That's the crucial thing to realize. I think one of the things that the left is very confused about in the North is they envisage some kind of return to normality. There will be no more normality. We are living in normality now, and it only gets worse. So the US is smashing into a very disoriented population, which has lived on the mythology of social democracy, or, you know, which I think is just a branch of liberalism. You know, which is that basically we are superior to the rest of the world, we're richer than the rest of the world, therefore we must be better, and therefore we just carry on doing what we're doing. I think the reason is quite simple: people are not suffering. I'm sorry to say this, but I did a little calculation of the number of poor people in various parts of the world by the standards set by the United States. Now, if you take the US poverty line, which is $27.80 a day, I believe, the percentage of the population of sub-Saharan Africa which lives below the poverty line of the USA is 92%. So the North American population is not being treated well, particularly Black people, people of color. But compared with what the situation is in sub-Saharan Africa or the Middle East or South Asia, Latin America, there is no comparison. There's no comparison. And that is what is driving multipolarity. Why is Saudi Arabia and India and countries like that finally coming together and forming some sort of very disparate, economically disparate bloc? Because the US dollar no longer offers them a way forward. So therefore, the US, and Michael Hudson has pointed this out, is not merely attacking the global South, it's attacking Europe. Europe is in the target. Is in the gun sights. And, you know, the whole Nord Stream thing is all about basically, you know, as the original project of NATO was described, you know, keep America in, keep Russia out, and keep Germany down. And I don't think there's any partner in Europe. I think this is the whole Liz Truss phenomenon, the Boris Johnson phenomenon, is sort of crazy belief that you can be a kind of 53rd state. There's nobody in Europe that America is bailing out because it hasn't got the resources to do it. It can't bail anybody out. So I think that you will get a very major crisis in the North in which austerity will be at the front. Now, what's the relation between that and war? Scott Ritter has said this in some of the platforms I've shared with him. He says the real test for the anti-war movement will be whether it links the battle against the attack on its own people that is now going to, which is starting now, it's unfolding as we speak. Will they draw the connection between that and the war? That's the real test. If they draw that connection, and there are signs that in some places, some of the Czech mobilizations were very interesting because there was people linking the war to austerity. And what it first takes the following form: we're not against the war, but we're not willing to pay for it. And we should be open to such currents. We shouldn't say these currents are not true anti-imperialists, not true Bolsheviks. I think we have to be extremely open. We have to get in debates with them. And in particular, those debates must ensure that we move them away from the fascist positions to which they're now being drawn, as has been pointed out. But I think that there's possibility that the necessity is of mass currents in the north that say we would rather have our own situation dealt with properly than have this war. And if you get that, I think you're going to begin to get a very different arrangement to that, and we have to be ready for that. We have to be open to debate with forces who are not going to come as agreeing with everything in the manifesto, but are beginning to question the war. So I think that's an extremely important next stage of our development. The final thing I want to say is this: what's happening in the global south? I think what Oleg said is what I actually expected. I mean, it's one of the things I've been quietly saying to you. You can't run a war without communism. And one of the things that people don't realize about the history of the United States is that whenever it went to war, it went communist. The whole of the United States economy during the war was taken over by the state. Now, it was taken over in a very peculiar way because the state was actually run by the corporations. So they set up, sort of the War Management Board, which is all the big corporations in America, and they organized the state to tell people what to produce, to organize a command economy. You can't run a war without a command economy. And that's why, essentially, I think one of the most significant things now going on in Russia is actually the move towards command economy in very important parts of production, which are essential to military production. The next step, of course, is to organize a command economy in what's essential to human life, which is what you're going to have to do if you're going to maintain the unity of the population. So let's see where the talk about Lenin begins to lead in that respect. But the paradox is this, is that it's back to the question of working class unity. Up until now, even the communist world, even the communist world was divided. So the Sino-Soviet split, 1956, meant that even though 80% of the world's population lived in countries that were split by imperialism, the fight between them consumed them more than their unity. Now, the question now is, if you get this move towards, increased influence of communism, seeing the sense of what China's doing in the global south, will the unity which is being found, which is a pluripolar unity, hold? I think it will. It has to. If even Modi and Saudi Arabia think it's more useful to be working with Russia, then I wonder what it would take to split it. Although the United States is working on everything it can possibly do, as we know. If that comes about, the situation is actually relatively favourable for people in the north simply waking up. You can't carry on living in a bubble of self-deception forever. All history shows there's a point. The history of the German Revolution of 1917, 1918, which everybody should bone up on, shows that there's a shifting moment in a war when the population says, we have been lied to, we have been deceived, we have been worked over, and we are so angry we are not taking it. It's not for nothing that Lenin spoke of the epoch of wars and revolutions, because war is the mother of revolution. You only have to look at what happened in Portugal in 1974, which was the only European post-war revolution that there has been, when the war in Angola and Mozambique was creating such catastrophic losses on the army that the generals themselves went over to socialism, and you had the Carnation Revolution and all the rest of it. So I think there are a number of circumstances which are very favorable. They're not yet being realized. That's why we are very, small. But I think we have to be ready for our influence to get rapidly larger. And in order to do that, the key, what I see as the absolute key thing, is to be open to new developments. The one thing that I hope we do not descend into is a flurry of, how can I put it, position taking, in which we think that the key thing we now have to do is get everything right. I think we've got everything right. We've got the main things right. Okay. What we now have to do, and we've got a solid record of working together, of learning to manage our differences. We've created a very good functioning editorial board. We need a lot more money, though, so don't forget to give us money. Because we have no big funders. We have no Frankfurt School Institute to support us. But we've got that. Now the thing is to be open. Now the thing is to tell the world what the new things that are going to start going on with this austerity.
I'm Michael Hudson. I'm appearing here for the International Manifesto Group. If you like this video and ones like it, please subscribe. For more information, go to the address on the screen.